Sarah Viren is a writer and translator whose work has appeared in the Oxford American, Guernica, the Gettysburg Review, and elsewhere. She received her MFA at University of Iowa's nonfiction writing program, and she holds a PhD in English and comparative literature from Texas Tech University. Currently, she teaches at Arizona State University. Last year, her translation of Federico Falco's Cordoba Skies was published by Plowshare Solos, and just this month, University of New Mexico Press published her collection of essays Mine, which won the Riverteeth Literary Nonfiction Prize. Of her collection, Riverteeth's contest judge, Andre Debus, said Mine is, quote, not only moving, it is instructive and nourishing in a way that only art can deliver, close quote. I've heard it said before that essays and essay collections, while often lovely and instructive and profound, are not by nature page-turners. When it comes to Viren's collection, Mine, I have to disagree. Her work is deeply intimate and honest, and because of that, I found myself diving into the book for long stretches, resenting anything or anyone who pulled me away from it. Mine outlines the life Viren has called her own. Each essay feels fresh, and her prose is clean and tight, bursting with vivid images. Whether she's writing about a possibly dead possum in her backyard or her biblical namesake, Viren handles each subject adeptly, and readers can't help but want more. We're very excited to have her here with us today. Please welcome Sarah Viren.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that introduction. That was lovely. It's really, really nice to be here. I've had a great conversation just before this with Joey's class about the essay, and I'm excited to read some essays with you all. I thought, so something I really like, Michael and I were talking about poets and essayists and different genre writers, and I was thinking something I like that poets do often when they do readings is they read someone else's poem. Maybe we don't do that as essayists and fiction writers because it would take all our time up if we read somebody else's story or essay, but I thought I would begin. Linda Gregerson is one of my favorite poets, and I just wanted to begin by reading a poem from her. In part because what I thought I would read today is a lot about children, about my own children and the idea of having children. And this poem is called Slight Tremor, and I think it's about sort of the other end of the sort of life spectrum, which is when we start to lose those we love. Slight tremor. The fine fourth finger of his fine right hand, just slightly when he's tracking our path on his iPhone or repairing the clasp on my watch, I will not think about the myelin sheath, slight tremor only, transient, so the flaw in the pavement must have been my mother's back. So anyways, that's a poem. And if you haven't read Linda Gregerson, I really recommend her. I'm going to read just one essay from the book, and then I was going to read a really short essay that didn't make it into the book, in part because we were talking today about what makes a collection, right? Which is sort of different than what makes an essay. And so how do we decide how these sort of disparate parts that are stories or essays come together to make a book? And so this book itself is called Mine, and it's about ownership. It's trying to understand what we own or what we think we own in life. And so it's exploring that through a bunch of different lenses. But I also wanted to read another essay that didn't fit into that, so we can start to think, and if you want to in the Q&A, talk about, okay, how do we decide what works can come together for a book and which have to sort of fall out. So the essay I'm going to read is actually My Possum, which was mentioned in the introduction. I've been traveling quite a lot this semester, and I have 2 kids now. At this time I only had 1 kid, and I miss them. So this essay is theoretically about a possum, but it's also talking a little bit about having kids and that sense of ownership that we have, or we think we have when we have kids. So this is called My Possum. After 3 days of not sleeping, at least not really, I take Fen with me after dinner to dump a bag of garbage out back. I'm not sleeping because we have a baby girl, and suddenly she's not sleeping. She wakes every night with animal-like fury, thrashing her body and refusing to be still. After 3 days of this, Marta and I are both slightly addled. So when I unlatch the door to the back alley, I do not at first believe what I see. A long tail like a beetroot, fur that sinks near the chest, tiny gnats orbiting open eyes. It does not seem possible that a possum could be as big as a dog, or that it could have just died like that, right there where I need to walk. And for the briefest of moments, I'm convinced that someone has left it there as a warning. But then Finn begins to sniff at the limp body, and I call him off, throw it the trash, and hurry back inside, yelling, "You'll never believe what decided to up and die in our backyard." A friend of mine is going through a divorce, and we chat about it on the phone a day or two before I find the possum. She tells me it's gotten messy. "He's crazy," she says. "Really crazy. Our friends think it might be the rat urine." She pauses, probably for dramatic effect, and adds, "Did I tell you we have rats in our walls?" She has not told me. She lives in East Texas, and I live in West Texas, and where she lives, she says, wall rat infestations are not uncommon. Hers showed up right when she and her husband were trying to work things out. Or when she was, at least. But then the rats invaded the walls, and the whole house smelled like rat piss for weeks. Her husband said it was driving him crazy. "Some people just can't stand the ammonia," she tells me. "It didn't bother me or the kids, but he couldn't take it. He moved out. It was his excuse to finally leave." A team of rodent specialists came and removed the rats, rat nests, and rat piss, and rebuilt my friend's walls, but even then her husband wouldn't move back in. He never moved back in. In a month, they'll be divorced. Rats, like possums, are unlikable animals, but it doesn't mean we can't feel for them. I was living in rural northern Florida, interning at a small lesbian publishing house over the summer when it happened to me. The editors had sent me and another worker to their storage shed, which was really nothing more than an old barn, to get boxes of expired tax documents down from the rafters and haul them to the landfill. The boxes had been up in the rafters so long, the rats had made nests out of them, and each time we pushed a box down, a nest of baby rats came flying with it, making a splat when it hit. The dead baby rats were fish-like in their translucent smallness. But it wasn't them I felt for. It was their mothers, who never fell with their babies. Instead, they scuttled away down the rafters, their plump bodies heaving like an accelerated heartbeat. My internship was unpaid. I had taken it to get professional experience. But that day, watching those rat mothers scurry away after their babies had fallen splat, that was the only experience I've kept with me some 15 years later. When I check on the dead possum later that night, it's still there, still dead. So I ask Facebook what to do. Someone, I know it's a very common experience, someone, a semi-friend who knows more about dead possums than me, tells me I have to call animal control. I look up the number for animal control and see that it's now called Animal Services, and somehow that makes me feel hopeful. To serve is much kinder than to control. And so, with hope, I call Animal Services the next morning, and the woman who answers the phone tells me she'll get someone out as soon as possible to take care of my possum. I think to correct her, I simply found the possum. It isn't mine. But I realize that it's more mine than anyone else's. It's me who found it, and it's my number the Animal Services worker will call when he or she arrives and needs to locate the dead possum and take care of it. That expression also gives me pause. How do you take care of a dead possum? Several other sort of friends from Facebook answer my questions about the possum with a joke. They tell me to keep my back door shut, to run, or to give the dead possum a cookie. They post recipes for southern possum stew and suggest barbecuing it. I believe this is why sometimes women marry men, a lesbian friend comments. And I picture a broad-shouldered man with bulldozer hands picking up my possum and throwing it in the dumpster out back. This is the do-it-yourself way of taking care of a dead possum. But I have a wife, and neither of us has bulldozer hands. Even if we did, we're both too exhausted from not sleeping to do anything as constructive as take care of a possum. A real friend of mine tells me about the time she tried to save a dying squirrel. Her story is prompted by my story of the dead possum. Dead animal stories are contagious like that. I went to the barn, she says, and got out the horse salve and to put on a mangled squirrel that the dogs had gotten a hold of. But when she tried to doctor the injured squirrel, it clamped down on her finger with its tiny teeth. She still has a scar. Beady-eyed shithead, she adds. This is the way you talk if you grow up somewhere where there's horse salve, as my friend did. She lived on a farm in Ohio and spent her summers playing with animals in the ditch that ran between her house and the farm to market road. If you're like me, though, and grow up in a college town in the Midwest and later a coastal city in Florida, you will have had very few encounters with wild animals outside of a zoo. The only live birth you will have seen was your wife's when your daughter was born, and even that one will have left you feeling helpless. At home, we have a small library of animal picture books, and we read them to our daughter sometimes, taking turns making the sounds for each of the animals featured there. We moo and baa and meow and cock-a-doodle-doo. She claps for more. Her first word, if you can call an animal sound a word, was quack. We quacked when we saw the picture of the duck, and eventually she quacked back. But I've noticed during these months of making so many animal noises that some animals are not given a voice. The fox, for instance. When we get to that page in our book, I always make a puckered up face and sort of yap, yap, which makes my daughter laugh. The fish sound is also hard, but not impossible. We pop our lips, and soon my daughter starts popping her lips back. Look, she talks fish, we say. But possums don't get pictures in baby books. The animals we want our babies to know about are monkeys, elephants, dogs, cats, lambs, ducks, lions, tigers, and bears. Sometimes ostriches, toucans, and eagles. Sometimes even skunks. But the only possum you will ever see in a kid's book is one hanging upside down in a tree, which is something you never see in real life. And then, of course, there's the bigger question: do possums even make a noise? You can, of course, look up animal sounds on the internet. I look up possum noise after checking again on my dead possum out back, and the internet tells me that the possum has a low, throaty growl that it uses along with a hiss to protect itself. Throaty is a strangely sexual word, but there are videos online of the possum noise, and it is true the growl is guttural. You could call it throaty. After watching the possum hiss and growl, I turned to the other possum videos, ones with titles like One Mean Possum and Possum versus Raccoon and Killer Dog Hunts Possum. But my favorites are the more lighthearted ones. How to Catch a Cute Possum and Baby Possum Swimming and Playing Dead and More! That last video shows a baby possum in someone's backyard pool trying to swim while several kids yell in the background. Hello, baby possum, hello! Where are you going, baby possum? Their high-pitched enthusiasm for all things possum is telling. It means that our kids' books could include possums, just like they could include rats and biting squirrels, and maybe even divorce and sleeplessness and crying babies, if they wanted to. Possums may be ugly, but they're not unlikable, especially baby possums in swimming pools or baby possums playing dead on command. The scientific name for playing dead is tonic immobility, and it doesn't only happen in possums. Sharks do it, and rabbits, a few snakes. Some animals decide to play dead, but the possum has no choice. Tonic immobility takes over whenever the possum is deeply frightened. If sufficiently scared, it can enter a coma state and stay there for hours. During this state, a foul-smelling green mucus leaks from its anus to scare other animals away. Attractive, no? We humans can do it, not the green mucus, but the playing dead. We talk a lot about fight or flight, but there is a third F, freeze. Most often you hear about it in cases of violence. Victims of rape will recall feeling paralyzed and unable to act. Victims of sexual abuse too. For me, freezing is what happens in nightmares. There is someone stalking me and I want to run, but my body freezes. I am stuck to a couch and someone has come to kill me there. And just before I die, just before I'm murdered, I wake up unfrozen, not dead, and no longer plain that I might be. I blink back the contours of my bedroom until the familiarity of it calms me. Until somewhere in the night, I again hear crying. The one time I killed an animal, it wasn't a possum or a rat or a squirrel, but a cat. I was 17 and going to a coffee shop to meet someone I thought I was falling in love with. teenage love is the opposite of tonic immobility. You feel like every cell in your body is blinking wildly. I was driving from my parents' house in the suburb to a coffee shop in town, and the dark road was almost empty, save for what I thought was a single plastic bag tossing in the wind across the pavement that stretched out before me. The bag danced and billowed, and I thought about how tight my heart felt and wondered if this time we might brush hands, or maybe even kiss, what that kiss would feel like, how our bodies would be flushed. And that is when I realized that the bag was not a bag, but a cat. I had no time to swerve. It sounded like a knock, a soft, thick knock. My wheels lifted for a moment over its body before settling down on the solid, paved road again. The sound a dead cat makes, I will never forget that. The poet Gerald Stern once wrote a poem about finding a dead possum, though he properly called it an opossum, being from Pennsylvania and not from the South or Midwest, where we insist on dropping the O. When I got there, he writes, the dead opossum looked like an enormous baby sleeping on the road. This is how he begins the poem, which has always seemed to me like a response to William Stafford's Traveling Through the Dark. In that poem, the speaker finds not a possum, but a dead, pregnant doe in the road, her baby still living inside her, and with that discovery comes a decision. He knows that if he doesn't push the deer off the road and into the canyon below, another car might hit it, which could cause more death or at least destruction. But if he pushes the doe, he will kill the baby inside her. His swerving, as he calls his hesitancy before he decides, is brief. In the end, he pushes the doe and kills the baby, but in doing so, he potentially saves a future human life. Stern, though, refuses to be noble in the face of death. He moves his opossum off the road, but in doing so, he rejects the poet's instinct to, this is a quote, praise the beauty and the balance of death as a part of life. Instead, he just feels miserable. And so, in comparison to Stafford's meditation on responsibility, Stern's poem feels like a defeat. And yet his is the one I return to most, perhaps because it refuses to say what is right when it comes to death or life. When my daughter was born, we called her La Ardilla, Spanish for squirrel, because of the small fluttering sounds she made when we held her in the hospital in the days after Marta's emergency C-section. Marta was wrapped in bandages then and had to get up every so often to change a giant pad into which she leaked what seemed like endless streams of blood. The hospital issued compression socks sighed, and the IV clicked like an old grandfather clock. When new doctors or nurses came to check on Marta or our daughter, they said, "I hear baby was breech." And then they said, "What a turd." I grew to hate that. Though Marta now thinks differently, I found the birth experience traumatic. The operating room was cold and her jaw trembled from the jolt of anesthesia. A curtain hung between her face and her belly, and when I peeked over as the doctors began to carve, one of the nurses scolded me. "You're not supposed to look," she said. So I held Marta's eyes until we heard our daughter scream. Then the nurses wheeled our baby to the nursery in her heated box while my wife lay there, her belly open, throwing up into a plastic jug. And for a moment, I remained between the two of them, unable to move. That moment of swerving was not simple, nor was my eventual decision noble. In the end, I left Marta and followed our baby, not because I loved her more, at that point she still seemed like a wild animal to me, but because she was the weaker, smaller one. We are taught to care for the vulnerable first. I am heating up a bowl of white bean and bacon soup from the night before, and the soup is simmering when I realize that the animal service worker still hasn't called. So I go out back to check on my possum. This time I leave Fen behind. I want to get a good look. I want to make sure there isn't something green oozing from my possum's anus and to double check that there were in fact gnats around its eyes. What I really want, though, is to touch its chest and feel if it is still warm. I open the door thinking about the possibility of my possum. It is warm outside, and for a moment I don't feel as tired as I've been these past few days. When I reach the spot where my possum had been, there is nothing there, only grass and a few tufts of white-gray hair. I checked the alleyway. There is a man throwing away bottles 2 dumpsters down, and I think to ask if he's seen a dead possum, but I don't. There are really only 2 possibilities. One is that the animal services worker has come and already found my possum on his own without calling me, and taking care of it for me. And if that is the case, I am disappointed, maybe even sad. I realize only now that I had wanted to be there when my possum was taken care of. I had wanted to take part in how the story ends. The other possibility, however, is that my possum was never really dead, no matter how sure I had been. And this option makes me happy. I imagine him somewhere after breakfast, but before lunch, blinking away the gnats with only slight confusion, and, as if life were never a question, popping up on all 4s in the same spot where he had once lain so still, and then sauntering off on his own, his beetroot tail swishing behind him. The next day, my daughter begins to sleep again, as if she had never scared us with her fits in the night, as if we had been sleeping soundly all along, and had never stopped thinking clearly about what is real and what is exhaustion. These things pulse up against each other, life and death, beginnings and endings, what we call ours, but is never really ours to begin with. So that's an essay from the book, and I think I have time. I'm just going to read a brief essay that didn't make it into the book. It's also about parenting, but from a much different perspective. And the form is also a lot different. So if people have questions, we could talk about that. So this is called. So I'm gonna read this, and then if I have time, I'll read a very short poem because I do love poems. This is called "The Granola Lesbian Mother's Guide to Having a Magical Day at Disney with Your 2.5-year-old." And as you might be able to gather from the title, it's about going to Disney World with my 2.5-year-old. I grew up in Florida, and I think people that grow up in Florida have a complicated relationship with Disney, and that might come out in the essay. Step 1. Agree to go to Disney with your wife, your wife's mother, and your 2.5-year-old daughter, even though it goes against everything you believe in as a feminist, anti-consumerist, contrarian stick in the mud. Because, what the heck, your daughter might have a good time. Step 2. Realize the night before that because you've never allowed your daughter to see Disney movies, she won't recognize any of the characters she will soon meet. Give her a YouTube primer on Disney's enduring influence on basically everything. Limit each video clip to 5 minutes so that she doesn't have too much screen time. Show her Peter Pan flying. Show her the Little Mermaid swimming. Show her a teapot singing while Beauty and the Beast walk down a flight of stairs. Do not show her the scene in Dumbo where his mom is taken away from him. This will make your 2.5-year-old daughter cry. Step 3. Choose to go on a beautiful, cool Saturday during the winter break. Step 4. Realize that everyone else has probably also chosen to go on a beautiful, cool Saturday during winter break. Wake your wife, your wife's mother, and your 2.5-year-old daughter early because, you tell them, you're going to get to the park before the rest of those lazy bums. Step 5. On the drive to the park, download an app that shows the wait time for all the rides at the park. Notice that because you did not wake up early enough, many of those rides already have wait times. The park has been open 15 minutes. Step 6. Try to enjoy your first experience waiting in a line. It will be a row of cars waiting to pay $20 to park. Pay $20 to park, and when the parking attendant with puffy eyes and a too tight pastel uniform hands you a receipt and tells you to have a magical day, tell her to do the same, even though both of you know that probably won't happen. Step 7. Realize you forgot the stroller. Wait in line to pay $15 for a magical rental stroller. Step 8. Take a picture of the castle that everyone else is also taking a picture of. Your daughter will probably not want to smile for this picture because it will still be early and she will be overwhelmed by all the people walking along the fake main street and by the fact that you and your wife's mother keep getting in her face and yelling, "Mickey!" Secretly tickle her so that she smiles. Take the photo. Step 9. Decide to go on the carousel first because that will be low-key. Nearly get trampled by other parents who also decided to go on the carousel first and who rushed the gates to get an outside horse for their child so that their spouse or parent can get a good photo of said child going around in circles. Realize that you have similar intentions, and when you see an outside horse, lunge at it while yelling at your daughter to run quickly so that you can saddle her up and claim said horse as yours. Go round and round in circles while your daughter almost smiles and yells at your wife that she is on a horse. Listen to your daughter yell at your wife that she's on a horse each time you pass your wife, taking pictures while you and your daughter go round and round in circles. Be glad when the ride comes to an end. Step 10. Force everyone to go on It's a Small World because you have fond memories of that ride. Realize that It's a Small World is kind of racist. Step 11. Use one of your fast passes. So people haven't known fast passes like lets you go in front of everyone else. Use one of your fast passes to go on the Peter Pan ride because your app tells you the wait is now 1 hour and 15 minutes. It is 9:15 in the morning. Fly over scenes from the movie in a mechanical car that is meant to make you feel like you are flying with Peter Pan. Recognize that you are not, in fact, flying with Peter Pan, and that the ride is definitely not worth 1 hour and a half, 15-minute wait, and pat yourself on the back for having had the good idea of using one of your 3 fast passes for this experience. Feel satisfied for the first time today. Step 12. On all rides and throughout most of the 10 hours that you and your wife's mother are at the Magic Kingdom, point out Disney characters that your 2.5-year-old daughter that your 2.5-year-old daughter does not really know or care about. Notice that she continues to have the same basic expression on her face. It is decidedly not magical. Step 13. Experience a real moment of joy while in a teacup that you are allowed to make spin around in circles. Ignore the fact that your wife's mother looks slightly peaked across the teacup lip from you. Keep turning that wheel that turns your teacup. You deserve joy too. Step 14. Look for a nice place to eat the packed lunch that you and your wife's mother have made so that your family won't waste money on the crappy food at Disney. When you cannot find a nice, quiet place, sit on a low brick wall beside a trash can. Eat your packed lunch in the most magical way possible. Step 15. When your daughter shows real happiness at seeing a fake Winnie the Pooh and Tigger walk by, grab her and run after them. Follow Winnie and Tigger to a small enclosed space where a line has already formed with other families also hoping to meet them. Get in said line with your daughter and wife and your wife's mother and assume that it will only be a 5-minute wait. Step 16. 15 minutes later, realize that this is not just about getting a photo with Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. Realize that there are adults in line without kids. Realize that these adults get long hugs from both Winnie the Pooh and Tigger. Realize that they go away with the hugest grins on their faces. Shush your wife when she asks out loud if this is some form of therapy. Step 17. Leave the line to meet Winnie the Pooh and Tigger because you've already waited 30 minutes and Winnie the Pooh and Tigger just left for a bathroom break. And though their handler says they'll be right back, you know this isn't true, and besides, your daughter is no longer all that interested in posing for a photo with them. As you walk away, briefly regret not getting a hug from Winnie the Pooh. Regret having this regret and wonder what is happening to you. Step 18. Go on several more rides, all of which will start to seem the same. Sometimes you're in a honey jar, and sometimes you're in a seashell, but it always lasts about 7 minutes, and afterwards you feel a little left down. Step 19. Remember that this is about your daughter and take her to a store so that she can hug the stuffed animal replicas of Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse, Winnie the Pooh, and the princesses from Frozen, a movie your parents have let her watch. Notice that she is smiling unprompted and try to be happy that she is happy, even if you could have done all of this at the Disney store in the mall back home. Step 20. Go to the bathroom to be alone for a moment. Sit in the splatter drops of someone else's pee and feel like giving up. Step 21. When your daughter falls asleep in her $15 magical rental stroller, volunteer to push her around the park while your wife and your wife's mother wait 45 minutes for the Haunted Mansion ride. Push your daughter around the park while she naps and realize that walking without a destination makes the whole experience a lot more enjoyable. Pass riverboats treading a river. Clatter over a bridge. Stop to watch a waterfall fall. Look up at the bluish glow of a castle. Hear the distant call of a railroad train. Smell turkey legs. Witness 4-year-olds in blue eyeshadow and princess slips. Notice whole families wearing the same t-shirt, announcing that they are part of the same family and that they are on a family vacation together in this year, 2006. Envy, not for the first time, how easily some people are made happy. Step 22. Find a nice spot in the shade and sit down. Look at your daughter's tiny dimpled legs jutting out from under the jacket you have thrown over the edge of her $15 magical rental stroller to protect her from the sun while she naps. Feel genuinely at peace in the shade beside your sleeping daughter behind a machine that smashes a penny into the shape of Mickey Mouse for 50 cents. Step 23. Skip the evening fireworks over the castle to go to Frontierland to buy your daughter a pretzel, because you have run out of pre-made healthy snacks, but also because she wants one. And she has wanted so little today, you want to buy her something that will make her happy. Watch the distant glitter of the fireworks while you wait in line to buy 2 $5 pretzels shaped like Mickey Mouse. Listen to the people behind you complain about the lines and how Disney is no longer about the children, it's all about the money, and how Walt would be rolling in his grave if he only knew what they had done with his park. Envy their belief that things were at least once upon a time only about the children and not about the money. Buy 2 pretzels and eat half of one, walking back in the dusk toward the bluish glow of the castle where dreams come true. Step 24. Hug your daughter when you see her again and delight in how much she delights in a pretzel. Step 25. Take a ferry boat back toward the first entrance, while you will then take a tram toward your car. Become confused about the signs pointing to 2 sets of trams, one for those parked in the heroes section and one for those parked in the villains. You will have parked in the Simba section, but neither you nor your wife nor your wife's mother or your 2.5-year-old daughter will have seen the movie in which Simba stars. Ask a smiling attendant whether Simba is a hero or a villain. The smiling attendant will smile and say that Simba is a hero, but then he will add that really, that's up to our interpretation, isn't it? Maybe what we think is a hero is really a villain. Or if you think about it, our villains might be heroes in the end. Thank you. Okay, so I'm gonna end there because I think we're at time. So, thank you. Are we doing a Q&A? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I would love to take questions, or if not, I'll just, throw my poem on you. Yeah. It's like no poems. Yeah. No.
I was just curious, where are you from in Florida? Where did you
So I grew up in Tampa. We moved there when I was 11, so I would say I've decided I'm Floridian. And then I went to college in Sarasota. But when I wrote this essay, I was actually living, there's a residency called Jack Kerouac lived for a year in Orlando, and they made a writing residency out of his old house, so I was living in Jack Kerouac's temporary house in Orlando. Are you from Florida?
I served a mission over there, so I lived in Jacksonville for the better part of a year.
Okay. The largest city in the United States, land-wise. Yeah.
Very spread out.
Yeah.
So I'm wondering, the exclusion of that essay with the collection, is it because of the form mostly?
Yeah, I think it's the form. So it's both the form, and then I wasn't sure that it was really dealing with ownership, right? It was talking about my daughter, but in some ways that essay seemed to be about the way in which we create this worldview of like who we are and, what sort of us and them. I mean, I guess there could be a way in which it's thinking about ownership, but it didn't feel like it was really doing something new. And I wanted each essay to sort of to try to understand ownership in a different way. So it was both form and tone, and then and also the approach to the sort of subject or the theme. Yeah, I had this idea of having an entire book of like these sort of instructional essays, but I think that might get tiring. But I like them. The thing I like about the instructional essay is that it forces other people to sort of own your experience, even if they're not you. I mean, there are very few other people that would have gone to Disney with their wife, their wife's mother, and their 2.5-year-old, and had this exact. Nobody has that exact specific experience. But I like that that form forces you into that experience a little bit. Yeah.
How often do you find your essays fitting into forms that you're familiar with? And how often do you find that they require you to innovate a new form? And how do you do that you require it?
Yeah, it's both difficult, but then it can be really exciting, right? Because the nice thing about form is sometimes you can just force yourself to try a new form or give yourself a constraint, and see where that allows you to go. So I would say about half and half. Like often half of the time I already feel like I know what I want to work out, and so then I start with a sort of what I would consider a sort of narrative form, or maybe in a lyric form where I'm allowing myself to sort of have moments of like white space between thoughts. But I have actually started with the form before, and so Pat and I were just talking about form, and I said that there was this one essay that I wrote where I was trying to put it in the ballad form. So it was about singing this song that was originally a ballad to my daughter. And I was taking this poetry class, we were looking at forms, and I was thinking about, okay, the ballad form and the way that the rhymes work. And so, and the idea that there's just sort of 4 lines in each stanza. And so I made a paragraph, the idea that each paragraph was a line. And I tried to make the last line, as if that paragraph was a very long line, the last line rhyme, in that sort of scheme. And that was actually helped me figure out that essay. Before, that essay wasn't working. And I think it's something about trying to make the essay itself actually be a ballad that was helpful to me. So yeah, I think it's really, some of the best work can come out of just forcing yourself to try a new form, right, that you've seen somebody else do. Because it's like in poetry for poets that, when you write with a constraint, you are not allowed to use the language that you would necessarily use, right? You're forced to use different word choice. But that can often be really revelatory. So I think that we can do something similar in essay writing. Yeah. Yeah.
What was the writing process like for your collections? Was it difficult to write such a person?
It wasn't like, it's funny, I've heard feedback since, especially from my mom's friends. They're reading this book in their book club. So then they like write me, and they're like, I'm so impressed that you could be so personal. And I'm like, yeah, I guess so. But I think I talked about this I was just meeting with some students earlier, that I was a journalist for a very long time, a newspaper journalist, and I always felt really shackled, like I couldn't allow my person to be there. And so maybe that experience has made it then, when I was allowed to write essays, that I really want my person to be there, right? I really want to sort of be there and be present and have that be part of the figuring out of the essay. So I have never felt that that sort of hesitancy or fear about the amount of sharing that I do, right? I mean, I think everybody has their line, right? How much of your life do you want to share or interrogate in that essaying process? And I think where I am now, I've always felt very comfortable with it. Yeah.
So, I'm graduating in journalism myself, and I feel like I hear a lot about writers who were originally journalists who made careers, they transitioned to essayists or, just authors. And so, what made you want to transition your career that way, and how did you do it?
Yeah, so we just talked about this earlier, and when I left journalism, 2 other young journalists left at the same time. One of them went to also get her MFA, so it was creative writing. One went to go to business school. He went to get an MBA at Yale. And then another one went to travel throughout Africa, and then I went to get my my MFA. And all of us, I think, were similarly just feeling like dissatisfied at the newspaper we were at, right? Like it wasn't, job-wise, it wasn't necessarily satisfying for different ways. But it's interesting because then we all sort of took these different paths. Like my one friend in business, he's now like makes tons of money, right? And he actually now became a consultant for the companies that come in and downsize newspapers, which is really sad to me. But for me, it was that I sort of felt like I had reached the limit for me personally about what I was going to learn, and I didn't really want to continue that sort of lifestyle. I think there's people that go into newspapers have a certain personality, and I don't know what sort of work you want to do in journalism, but you have to be pretty tough. And especially, I wrote in one of these essays about being so tired from constantly covering tragedy, and having to write about people that were at the worst point in their lives, and having to go up there and ask them to tell me how they felt right in that moment. And I think it's important work, but for me, I just felt like I couldn't keep doing it for the rest of my life. But lots of other people have that personality where they want to tell those stories that are important to tell, and they're able to, that's able to sort of feed them. And I think for me, I just sort of realized it wasn't feeding me. So I left. Yes.
What led you to the idea of ownership as a topic?
Yeah. So I think that for me, the process of figuring out the book felt similar to the process of figuring out an essay, in that I had some idea about, okay, I'm working on, I have the essays, they seem to be, working on this idea, but I'm not sure how they sort of speak to each other. And when I started my MFA, most of the other writers that I came in with had an idea about what they write about. And I was always so jealous of them, because they would just, we'd go around a circle and say who we were, and somebody would be like, I'm Jessica, and I write about the land and illness. And I was like, wow, that's incredible. I have no idea what I write about. I just knew that I used to write about journalistic stuff, and I wanted to write more about how I understood that as a person. And so I went through all these iterations. I used to say I write about weird people or unlikable people, because a lot of my essays are actually about people or things that are sort of discarded, or that the rest of the world doesn't want to embrace, right? But that didn't seem exactly right, and so I went through all these iterations, and I mentioned this in the class earlier this morning, but there were two essays that for me that sort of started to speak to each other, and I realized that they were trying to figure out ownership, or what it means to own something. And so the first one was the first essay in the collection, which is it's called My Murderer's Futon, and it's about having the furniture of a guy who was on trial at the same time for murder, where I was a journalist. And that sense of the ownership of things, and how, this had been his, now it's mine. The furniture was kind of ours in this weird way, and what that meant for me understanding my connection to him, or the connection in my head to somebody that was sort of reviled in that town where I was working. And then the second essay was this essay that I wrote about when my wife and I, who were married in Iowa, moved to Texas before the Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage. And we had been legally married in Iowa, and then we were unmarried in Texas. And that essay was trying to figure out that experience. What does it mean to have somebody who I could legally call my wife and now no longer can, so isn't mine anymore in a sort of legal sense? And so through those two essays, I suddenly realized, oh wait, this is something that I'm trying to figure out. And then I think sometimes once you have an idea, then things start to come together, right? And I wrote some other essays, and it started to sort of I started to figure out what its form is. Yeah, it's a process. Other questions? Yeah. I have a lot. So when I was a journalist, Joan Didion was the one that sort of introduced me to this idea of what it would mean to move from being a sort of journalist, because she does journalistic work, to suddenly having the eye. And I think Joan Didion also taught me what it means to have the mind on the page that's trying to, which we think of the essay being this sort of mind on the page trying to figure something out. She's got a very particular voice and a very particular mind. And so she was, I would say, that sort of bridge for me. And then James Baldwin, I think, was the one that gave me permission to be political, to feel like how can my work be personal and political and still be quote unquote art. And I think when I was a journalist, I have an essay about this, but there were times when I had to cover, so the one essay is about this time that I covered a ex-gay conference. So this conference about people this idea that you could become ungay, right? So there's this conference in which people could go to learn how to not be gay anymore. And so I covered it as a journalist, and I couldn't say who I was. I basically, myself was erased in order to try to objectively cover it. And it felt so false to me writing that story, but I wrote it for the newspaper, and then I rewrote it for this collection. And I, it's not going to not be political, because that's a political, like, my person is a politicalized person in the same way, not in the same way, but James Baldwin also talks about being sort of a politicized body. And so I think he gave me models for starting thinking about that. And then more recently, I really like Hilton Als, he writes for the New Yorker, but he has an essay collection called White Girls, which does this sort of cultural criticism and analysis that I think is really beautiful, where he's analyzing other texts or people or pop culture, and then also try to sort of analyze himself. And Eulabis is another essayist that I really love, and she also writes about race and her own sort of trying to understand her own prejudice. So those are 4 essayists that I love. But if you want to talk later, I can say lots and lots more essayists. I love the essay. I think once I realized the essay existed, I was like, oh, I know who I am, right? Because I was not a reporter. Yeah. Any more? Is it? Can I read this poem really quickly? It's really short, but I keep thinking about it because it's about my daughter, and my wife really likes it, so I'll read it really quickly. It's called The Natural Order. My maternal love is not me saying Tuesdays are the hardest because I don't see you for 5 hours and can think only about seeing you and your slack cheeks and your uncertain neck. It is not me talking with other mothers at the park while you build a sand world beside us about what if one day you were in a school somewhere and a man burst in gun drawn, aiming at your face. My maternal love is more like a shoebox than a picture frame, by which I mean that my love is practical and meant to store things that are practical too. Like that time you waved hello to the moon, or that day you pulled an eggplant from the fridge and cradled it in your arms, like I once cradled you in my arms, and began to shush it softly, softer than I ever shushed you, until somewhere in your eyes it fell asleep. Thank you.